Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from AlexMercedCoder.dev, and welcome to this JavaScript callback functions masterclass. So the hope is that after this video, you'll feel very comfortable with the concept of a callback. Now, if you have not watched my JavaScript functions masterclass, you should watch that before watching this video, because understanding callbacks does require you to have a foundation in JavaScript and particularly in how functions work. But if you've already watched that and you feel comfortable with what functions are in JavaScript, then we're in the good place to kind of have this video. Okay, so let's just recap a couple things. So we'll just call this callbacks.js. It'll be where we start. Okay, just as a reminder, okay, functions have parameters and arguments. Okay, so in the sense that if I were to define a function, so we'll say my func, in these parentheses, I could define placeholders, which are referred to as parameters. Okay, so we'll just do that, go with that. So A is a parameter, it's a placeholder, and B is a second parameter. Okay, and so now when I use the function, I can pass it something to fill in that placeholder. Okay, in this case, 1 and 2. Okay, so now when I run this code, this first argument is going to basically be stored in the first parameter. So A is now storing 1 and B is now storing 2. So now when it console logs, it'll console log 1 plus 2. So when I run this node callbacks.js, I get 3. Okay, so you can see a 3 right there. Okay, so bottom line is you have parameters, and we're able to kind of send things into a function for usage. Okay, so like, again, I can pass something into that function to be used. And it doesn't have to be a number. It can be anything. So I could pass in the string of 1 as the first argument. And if I do that, I'm going to get back the string of 12, because the way JavaScript works is when you add a string and a number together. So when we add the string of 1 and the number 2 together, it's going to coerce 2 into a string and add the two strings together. So you get 1, 2. So let's just to prove that out, let's just run the file, and you see I get 12. It's really a string of 1 and 2. Okay, so that's what parameters are. Okay, so where callbacks come into play is what happens if what we expect to receive as an argument is a function. Okay, so for example, let's just pretend that let's just change this my func, and we're just going to console log what A and B are. So what if I actually, instead, for the second argument, instead of passing in the number 2, I just passed in an arrow function that just returns the number 1. Okay, literally, here we go, we have an arrow function. Okay, these are the parameters, there are no parameters, and it returns the number 1. Okay, so if I were to pass in that function, okay, well, you see here, when we console log A and B, because that's what's happening on this line, A is 1, because we see the 1 right here, that's the first argument, so that's going to be A. But this function then gets stored as parameter B. Okay, and now you see this function is right there. Okay, and just to kind of see, if I were to console log B by itself, okay, we'll say the value of B, okay, and since we know it's a function, like we know that B currently, and the way I'm using it, is a function, I should be able to invoke or call the function. Because again, whenever I do this, okay, we'll say the return value of B. If I know that B is a function, I can then use parentheses to invoke it. Because whenever I put parentheses after like a name, like any kind of variable, it's going to assume that that variable has a function inside of it and will call that function. Okay, so now if I run this, I can see here that the value of B is a function. Okay, so you see like B, when I console log B by itself, not with the parentheses, it's the actual function itself. When I console log B with the parentheses after it, I'm invoking the function. So what I'm logging is the return value of the function. Okay, so first thing we're trying to establish here is that I can pass in functions as arguments. Okay, to show you another example, let me write a function. So we'll say function return 2. Okay, and it's just a function that returns the number 2. Okay, so there's a function, and then I'm going to use my func again, except now we're passing, instead of writing an arrow function right in line, I'm actually going to pass the function my name. I'm passing a variable with the function in it. Okay, so essentially the function that's called return 2 becomes the value of b. So now this run, b is going to just run it so you can see the result. So you can see here, first we had the value, the first time we called it right here, it's an anonymous function, and it returns 1. Okay, cool. And now in the second run, we see that return 2 is the value of b, because in that time our b argument is return 2. And notice I don't pass in the parentheses afterwards, because I'm not invoking the function. Whenever you invoke a function, what you're really submitting is the return value. I'm not trying to pass the return value as an argument. I'm trying to pass the function itself as an argument. As an argument. That's why when I log b by itself, look, it's worth the function. See, the value is the function. Because just the variable by itself is the function. And then when I use parentheses after the function's name, I invoke the function executes and gives me back a return value. Okay? So generally when I'm doing this, what's referred to as a callback, where I'm passing a function as an argument, not the function's return value, that's all it is. So the idea is that I'm giving a function a function. Okay, I'm saying, hey, this function needs a function to do its job. Okay? Yeah. Okay? So that's the deal there. Okay? Cool. So that's all a function. That's all a callback is. So at the end of the day, all a callback is a function passed as an argument to another function. That's it. So whenever we say, hey, a callback, that's all it means. Okay? And that means we can use the function in the function, which means I can pass different functions to have different results. The way I like to think about this is think of this like a vacuum. Okay? Whenever you buy like a vacuum, that same vacuum head doesn't work for all situations. Okay? Imagine if there was only one vacuum head. You'd have to buy like multiple vacuums for different situations. But vacuums understand that one head isn't enough. So they're built in a modular way where you can swap out the head. Okay? And so that way you can sweep up multiple things. Okay? So let's just do another example. Okay? We'll just call this callbacks 2. So for example, let's say I wanted to create a function called function, operate 1 with 1. Okay. And what this function is going to do is going to take a callback, which I'm going to abbreviate that argument as CB. So CB for callback. And what it's going to do is that it's going to take whatever the callback function you pass in is, pass it 1 and 1 as the two arguments, and it's going to return the return value of that function. So this function, whatever it is, we're going to pass it a function, which will be saved as CB. It'll pass the numbers 1 and 1 as two arguments to that function and return that value. So let's see how we could use this. So let's say I wanted to add 1 and 1 together. Okay, I could do this. So I could say, hey, I want to return a function that takes the two arguments, 1 and 1, A and B, and then returns the sum of the two numbers. And I can do this for like any possibility. I could say, what if we do a minus? Multiply. Divide. So you see, by passing it a different function, what it does with 1 and 1 different. Either way, each function is designed to take two arguments, A and B, so 1 and 1, but what it does with 1 and 1 are different each time. Okay, so if we run this, actually wrong file, node callbacks 2.js, you see here in the first situation, we're running the same function. The only difference is that the callback, that function we're passing as the argument, is this function here that's going to be saved inside this CB argument. So when it executes this function, CB is going to equal this function. So it's going to return A plus B, so 2. So we see 2 is the first. So this function returns 2, which then gets returned by operate with 1. In the second situation, we pass AB, return A minus B. So you see 1 minus 1 is 0. Second scenario, we do multiply. 1 times 1 is 0. And then when we do 1 divided by 1, you get 1. But you can see it's always going to do something with 1 and 1. Just what it does with it is different depending on what I pass in as a callback. So I can pass in any kind of operation I want. Okay, so that's generally the purpose of callbacks. They allow you to do what's referred to as a higher order function. Okay. Okay, what a higher order function is a function that represents a portion of the logic and takes another function for the remainder. So in this case, my operate with 1 function handles the giving the numbers of 1 and 1, which is kind of useless. But then my callback handles what the remaining logic. Okay? So a really typical application of this concept of a higher order function, okay, is going to be with like map. Okay, so let's talk about map. Okay, one of my favorite functions in any language. Okay, so generally what you want to do, let's pretend that I have an array. So let's say const r equals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. What I want to do is double all the numbers in the array and have a new array for it. Here's what I would have to do. I have to say const new array. So this would be the logic I'd apply, and it would just be an empty array. Then what I would do is I would loop over the original array. Okay, I would loop over the original array. And then what I would do is maybe just say, okay, create a variable for the item. So const item equals ri. So it's taking that item in the array based on the index and saying, hey, this variable item on this loop represents the item in that spot in the array. And then what I'll do is I'll take the new array and I will push the item times 2. I'll double it. Okay, so now there's this new array that's going to have the doubled version of each item. And see, now afterwards, if I console log the new array, let's just console log both of them. Okay. Okay, we'll say here old array, new array. Oh, wrong. Node map.js. And you can see here the old array is unchanged. Okay, it's still 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But using this loop, I've created the logic to double it. Okay, now this kind of logic I might have to do all the time. There's plenty of times where I want to take an old array and transform it into something else. And generally, the logic for that always requires me to loop over the array. So why should I have to write that loop every single time I need to make that change? Okay, wouldn't it be nice to have a function to take the things in one array and map them to a new array? Okay, so let's create a function that does that. We'll call it function map to new array. Okay, so usually we just call it map, but just so you can see what we're doing, we're mapping old array to new array. That's what the map function essentially does. Okay, now what things do we need to know? Well, we need to know which array we're working with. So the first argument probably should be the array. Okay, so now I can create this function, and let's say I wanted to loop. So what we want to do is take a new array. So we're going to just take that same logic we had a second ago. Okay, but do we always, so this is basically the same literally the same logic we had up here. So it's taking the array that we give it and looping over it. But now here, do we really want to do this every time? Do we always want to double the numbers? There might be times I want to triple the numbers or quadruple the numbers or whatever. So what we do here is that we say instead of just pushing in arbitrarily item times 2, we're going to say, hey, how about this? How about you give us a callback? You give us a function, and then we're going to pass the function, whatever function you give me, we'll take the item in the array, because again, remember we defined this item variable here that represents the item in the array. And we might as well pass it the index in case you need it. So we'll pass it I, the index. And then whatever the return value of this function will get pushed into the new array. Okay? And that's essentially how map works. So notice that all this function is doing is handling the whole creating the new array and looping over the array part of it. Now, what do we push into the new array? That's the part that's unknown. So this is the whole higher order function where this is handling a piece of the logic, but then we need to give it the other part of the story. So now what I can do is I can say if I want to just double the array, so let's just do like console.log, map to old array to new array, take the original array R, and pass it a function that takes the item and the index and doubles it. Okay? But now if I want to do the same thing but triple it, I just pass it a different function. So instead of me having to write all this logic over again, this function handles all the looping logic. I don't have to do that again. All I have to think about is what do I want to do to each thing in the array, and create a function that just handles that piece of the picture. So it makes it where the amount of thinking I have to do less, because instead of me thinking about, okay, how do I get the new array from the old array, I just have to think about what is the change I want to make. Okay, so it becomes what's more declarative. I'm describing what I want, and the function kind of knows the rest of the picture. So if I log this, you'll see this is the result of this line. See, every item is doubled, and this is the result of this line, doing everything tripled. So now what I can always do is just take any array and convert it into a new array using a function to decide how to take the old value and turn it into the new value. Okay? And that's what map is. Map is just a function. So basically, this is already built into JavaScript. Okay, I can just take any array, and array has map built into it. And since map is built into the array, I don't have to specify the array. I can just specify the function. Okay, so that's why you have all these callback methods built into arrays. And the beauty about them being built into an array, they're already aware of the array you're operating on, which is why you never have to pass the array first, because it's already that. Since this is a method of that specific array, it's aware of that array. Okay, it uses this keyword under the hood. We won't go there right now. Okay, but that's what callbacks allow us to do. They allow us to create these higher order functions. Okay, basically allow us to take one function that does most of the work, but has this one piece that it doesn't know, and give it the rest of the story, saying, hey, okay, you know half the directions, let me give you the other half. That's the beauty of callbacks. Okay, it allows me to sit there and say, okay, here's the rest of the instructions. Now, a couple other applications. Let's show you some examples of where callbacks often pop up. One is you already saw here, are the array methods. Okay, so let's just go through each one real quick. Array methods.js. There's the array callback methods. I'm just going to go through each one real quick. So we have map. So first let's just have an array. Const r equals 1, 2, 3, 4, and 9, 10. There's map, which again, basically what this does is maps old array to a new array. So basically when I do this, console.log r.map, that's going to double the array. There's going to be filter, and actually I should probably have a little label, map. Okay, then there's going to be filter, which filters the old array into a new array. So it's going to say how only these things should be kept in the new array. Okay, so to show you an example here, this example is going to filter any item that's not even. So again, this math right here, this logic right here is the number even, because if it's divisible by 2, which is what this is checking, then it's even. So only even numbers will stick around. Okay, then there's reduce, which takes an old array, and instead of giving you back a new array, it just turns that array into one value. Like adding all the numbers together or doing something with all the numbers, but the idea is you're turning it into one thing. You're reducing it to 1. So in this example, and again, I do have a video on JavaScript array methods where I go over each of these methods more in depth. I'm not going to do that here. That's not the purpose of this video. It's just to understand the concept of callbacks. The idea that for each of these functions, the function handles part of the story, and I'm giving it a function to finish the remainder of the story. Okay? So in this case right here, what it's doing is taking, basically the act represents the running total. So basically what you're doing is you're taking the running total and adding the next item in the array starting from 0. Okay? And I think I have a whole video literally just on reduce. Okay, a few other ones. There's like for each. Actually, let's do sort. This just sorts the old array. So this is just sorting the, this is just going to sort the array in numerical order. Okay, so let's just actually like show these so far. There's a bunch more. I'm not going to go over every single one. Okay, actually I want to do node array methods.js. And you can see here when I did the map, see it gave me a new array where each one's doubled. Like each of these functions are essentially doing a different version of that looping logic. The difference is that like map loops over every item and creates a new array with the return value of the callback. Filter uses the callback to determine whether the value should be in the array or not. So if the callback returns a truthy value, it pushes it into the array. If it returns a falsy value, it doesn't push it into the array. Reduce, it just does this running calculation. And then sort will then do sort of a basic sort using the callback function to compare the two items in the array. Okay, and depending on the result of the comparison, it'll swap them or not swap them. That's what basically each of these functions are doing. Okay, but they're asking you to give it a function to provide it that extra piece of unknown logic. Okay, then let's show you some. Okay, we'll just call it more callbacks, but this time it's going to be callbacks.html because I want to show you some callback examples that generally occur on the front end, okay, or in front end JavaScript logic. So in that case, we're going to need a browser window in a second. So I'm going to just open up the browser. Google Chrome, open up, Google Chrome, open up Google Chrome. Okay, so I got Google Chrome open there on the left. So what I'm going to do is in this HTML file, I'm just going to do some HTML boilerplate. Again, this is not particularly an HTML lesson, but I can write JavaScript in my HTML file by putting in a script tag. Wonderful. Okay, and I'm going to put a button right here. So using JavaScript DOM logic, meaning the ability to use JavaScript to manipulate what's going on in the document that's being displayed by the browser, what I can do is I can actually attach an event to this button. So I'll say click me. So now if I open this up in the browser, because I have a extension called Live Server, which you can install in as a Microsoft VS Code extension. If I use that, I can use that to open up this right here. And you see this button right here that says click me. Make that a little bit bigger. Okay, click me, but right now it does nothing. The button does nothing because I've never told the button to do anything. So what I can do with JavaScript is I can go grab the button. So right now this in itself doesn't require callbacks. Const button, I use the query selector function that just basically scans the HTML looking for a button tag and then takes the first button tag it finds and saves it in this variable. But now with every HTML node that I can capture has a function called add event listener. Okay, and this add event listener function has two arguments. What am I listening for? What event should occur? We're going to say, hey, when you click on this thing, so when you click on the button, then it's like, what do you want me to do when I click the button? I don't know what you want me to do. We give it a callback. The callback describes what should happen when they click the button. So in this case, what I want it to do, okay, I'll use an arrow function. What I want it to do is I want to say alert hello world. Okay, so now whenever we click on the button, so again, the add event listener and the click argument say, okay, make something happen when the button is clicked. But it is my callback that adds the what, the what should you do when you click the button. So now if I click on the button, alert, hello world. Okay, awesome. Okay, sometimes you may want to fetch like a JSON data, like JavaScript JSON data from like a third-party API. Okay, save us some time, I'm just going to generate some JSON data. So I'm just going to sit there and go to bar.google.com. Okay. Generate me some JSON data on D and D classes. Okay, so it'll just generate us like a JSON object real quick. Okay, cool. This works for me. I'm gonna just wait for it to finish generating. Is it done? Yes. Okay, so I'm gonna copy this JSON. We're gonna create a JSON file in here. So we're gonna just say dnd.json, and I'm just gonna copy that JSON in here. So this is gonna simulate like working with an API. Okay. So let's change what happens in that callback. So let's go back to my HTML file. So instead of it just alerting hello world, let's make a fetch call. Okay, so make it an API call. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the fetch function, which is built into front-end JavaScript. And the fetch function allows me to specify a URL to go get stuff from. Since I'm using my local area to do this, I can just literally just do /dnd.json. Okay. Actually, I should be able to put just like the dot there so I specify that, hey, it's the file in this folder. So when I put that dot in there, it makes it a file path because it basically implies starting from the folder that we're currently in. Okay, and then what happens is that when you use fetch returns a promise. Okay, and a promise is just this basically this weird JavaScript object. I have a whole video on promises as well. That basically just says, hey, I'm not sure when this is going to be done, but you can tell me what to do when it's done through a function called .then. And what .then does is says, okay, when the fetch is done grabbing whatever you told it to grab, in this case, the JSON data from that file, okay, tell me what to do next. So it's going to return me a response object from which I actually am going to want to turn that response to a JavaScript object. So we use response.json. Okay, and that returns another promise. Just how would you know that is you studied how fetch works. Okay, again, not the purpose of this video. I do have a video just on fetch and how it works. But then I would do that then again to handle that promise. So when then that promise is done, technically here, what's being passed to that callback should be the return value of the previous .then, which will be the JavaScript object of that data. And then what we'll do is we'll console.log the data. Okay, so essentially what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna open up the terminal here. So here's the console. So theoretically, if I did this right, when I click this button, it's gonna trigger this event. And again, we describe what happens using a callback, which is gonna call this fetch. And then when this fetch is complete, what happens next is triggered by the .then, which we describe what the .then does using another callback. We pass the function to the .then, and then when that .then is finished, that triggers another .then, and we describe what happens in there with another callback. So you see, we're now using callbacks as a way to describe what to do when you're done. Okay, so we're saying, okay, when you're done with the fetch, and then do this. When that's done, then do this. Okay, allows you to describe what's referred to as asynchronous operations. And just to make this look a little bit cleaner. Okay, so you can see we fetch, then this, then that. Okay, so let's see if that works. And it worked. So you can see here, I click the button and see the data from the JSON file got fetched. Okay, and this is what you would do is if you were fetching from like a third-party API, if you were like fetching data for like the weather, or maybe your backend API that's fetching data from your database, you would use fetch to go fetch that data. And again, your ability to trigger, hey, do that fetch when a user clicks a button, that requires a callback because you need to describe what happens when the user interacts with your website. Okay, the add event listener can help set up the event, hey, when this event happens, but what happens is based on your callback. Okay, fetch can describe, hey, what needs to be fetched, but it's the callback to the .thens that describe what happens when the data is fetched. Okay, so callbacks allow us to provide the piece that's missing. That is the point. Callbacks allow us to create a function that allows us to complete another function, because another function really only provides us half the story. And our callback that we put in there and allows us to create more modular functions like that vacuum cleaner, where instead of having to recreate the whole vacuum cleaner and have lots of different vacuum cleaners, lots of different functions, we can have one function that we can just plug in different heads, basically different callback functions, to get different results depending on what our need is at the time, without having to replicate the same logic over and over again. Okay, I don't have to write the logic for how a button click works. I just use it. All I have to do is describe what happens when the button is clicked. I don't have to write the logic for how do you fetch data from a third-party URL. Okay, I just have to describe what you do once you've done that. I don't have to write the logic for looping over an array and creating a new array. I just have to write the logic on what should the transformation be on each loop in map. So again, the idea behind callbacks is saying you have half the story and we are now giving you the rest of the story. So hopefully this helps you make callbacks more tangible and clear. It's one of the hardest concepts to get when you're in the early stages of learning JavaScript. So you may want to watch this video more than once, but hopefully this helps. My name is Alex Merced from AlexMerced.dev. Have a great day and enjoy.